PolicyLink was started more than 20 years ago, and it was started for a very simple reason, that the issues of race needed to be front and center, and that the nation was never really going to heal until it could deal with race. And in the context of think tanks, Angela Glover Blackwell, who founded PolicyLink, felt that think tanks often at that time weren't really representing the voice, wisdom, and experience of people of color, especially Black people in policy discussions. And since we believe that local leaders are national leaders, we thought that that was essential. But she also felt that there were just too many, it was kind of like a dominant logic in the Beltway. And so she decided to situate PolicyLink in really one of the, some of the would call some of the ground zero for some revolutionary action, the founding of the Black Panthers in the Bay Area in Oakland, California, to give it a different voice, a different perspective, a different verb about how to take up this work. And so that's why PolicyLink was started to extend the civil rights gains, to begin to think about now, as we're beginning to get some rights, how do we begin to talk about the creation of a just and fair society? And so that's how PolicyLink came about, to be that voice, to be a place where leaders of color and everyone can come and do racial equity work without the fear of getting fired, without the fear of having your voice stifled.
That's great. And you have picked up that mantle and are carrying it forward with, I can attest to, with thoughtfulness, passion, and a untiring drive, which is just great. So let's dive right in and talk a little bit about the role of legacy institutions. Let's just talk about institutions in social change first. So you and I have had a conversation. We are living in a moment where there is enormous civic action, which is critical, but we've also talked about the role of institutions. So this from a social change perspective, I'd love to hear your perspective on the importance of institutions in carrying movements forward and both how they can contribute and hold it back.
Well, I think given how the United States is organized, that strong institutions are bedrock to a strong democracy. They are the transmitters and the holders, the standard barriers for what we care about, one way or the other, good or bad. And so strong, this is what John Gardner believed, that if you're going to have a beloved community, our institutions must care about community. Our government must care about community, must nurture it and foster it. And quite frankly, we've not had that. I mean, the reality is, while we've been able to have a charity orientation, many of our major institutions have not wanted to say our names since their inception. And that's been part of the problem. Imagine being someone as revolutionary as Angela Glover Blackwell. And for probably like the first 5 years, folks said, don't talk about race. Don't even use the word equity. So really to have one of your arms tied behind your back simply because folks were uncomfortable, not because we were in a results-based conversation around what was needed, simply because white comfort was situated over Black pain. And to have to live with that, to try to build an organization, to try to nurture your baby, this vision of what PolicyLink could be, when folks weren't down with it. And now, to be at a place, probably over the last 5 years, where people say, okay, we can talk about equity, we can talk about race, we can be a little bit more comfortable about them. Now the question is, do we want to do the work around those things? And that has been the perpetual struggle in this nation. Will our institutions do the work? Now, if we say institutions are essential to a strong democracy, the danger that I feel right now is that we don't understand that, and we don't understand our role. We talk about empowerment, we talk about power building, we use all these fancy words. But here's what I know. Black women have delivered us a moment. So we don't even have to do the work. They've delivered us a movement. So for all those institutions that were uncomfortable or afraid or didn't know how to actually take up their leadership role to do it, you've been handed this movement. You've been handed a movement that is just not about being in the streets. It is also accompanied with the intellectual rigor of a platform that we often say we need. We need data, we need analysis, we need intellectual heft. You've got all of that now. Now the only question is, do you want to make a substantial contribution to designing a nation that is just and fair? And the question is, Will our institutions translate that energy from the street into real action, real policy? Or will we just have conversations, let that window of opportunity die out, and then blame the Black Lives Matter movement for never, ever being able to realize its promise? In order to realize the promise of the Black Lives Matter movement, every sector must do its part.
So let's just stop for a second and make crystal clear, because I want to build the next question. So we have a moment where, my words, but based on our conversations, push back if I overstep this.
Yeah.
Kind of white liberal organizations create enough space for the Angela Glover Blackwells to step up and create an institution. And the Angela Glover Blackwells have to navigate, as you say, with one hand tied behind their back, inserting the ideas using language that doesn't threaten the institutions, doesn't make people feel overly uncomfortable, and builds momentum. A series of events, good and bad, catalyze a breakthrough moment where you have the ability for now these institutions to say the word, look more directly in the eyes of the racism that the country was built on. And there's a pivotal moment then of kind of looking and processing, which in part we heard from Edgar is an important moment, but not one that paralyzes us in process, but actually drives us towards action. And that is the moment that we are currently in.
This is the moment that we're currently in, and it's been the moment that we've been in. The moment isn't new. This moment has been here. The question is, has our consciousness caught up with the moment? And the reason why I say that is because think about how far we could go back in civil society, where we've been talking about impact at scale and return on investments and results. Well, what the hell do you think all those words mean? Right? Whole population change, collective impact. All of those words suggest something that we've not been wanting to do. And so you can't keep trying to come up with a fancy word that is going to be the substitute for dismantling oppressive structures. You just got to be willing to do that work. And that's what I'm excited about right now, is I feel like we are getting to a critical mass of institutions that are committed to doing that work. And so what I'm offering is not a critique right now. It's just an acknowledgement of where we've been and some of the frustrations that many of us have felt, and really a call to action to not blow this moment. If you care about people power, if you care about liberation, then we should honor what people of color, oppressed people continue to do. They continue to deliver us moments. And what we must do now is honor that moment.
So let's talk about legacy institutions and honoring that moment. Mm-hmm. I acknowledged at the beginning, you and I share a very strong analysis that legacy institutions have been driven by values which are actually constructive, and at the same time been utterly complicit in reinforcing the racial caste system that has dominated the United States for 400 years. Mm-hmm. And there have been moments over the course of our history where we've been able to create malleability in those institutions to step into the work. We saw it during the first Reconstruction, right after the Civil War. We saw it again in the 60s. And in both times, we saw massive amounts of kind of reckoning, an opening, and then an ossification, and then a kind of peeling back. So as we look, as institutions like Independent Sector or any of the big legacy organizations that are stepping into this work in varying degrees, how do you harness that openness and drive it forward? What is it that's going to keep us from driving back to retrenchment?
Well, I think the first thing is institutions have to ask, who do they serve? And get clear about that. Because if you're not clear about that, you can easily become distracted. You become distracted with initiatives and what funders want you to do, or power building for your own institution. When I talk about who do we serve, PolicyLink serves 100 million plus in America who are economically insecure. That's 1 in 3 plus in the nation. And so what that means is there's only so much work I can do that's going to be liberating for that population. So if I want to answer the question, is anyone better off? There's a whole body of work that is dangerous work that must be done. Or I could be, quite frankly, very, very busy, describing the phenomena of the 100 million and making a living off of that, but actually not changing anything for them. And so if our institutions would begin to put that marker out there that says, we're clear about who we serve, and our strategy is going to be organized around that, and we will be able to answer the question, is anyone better off? That creates a transformative level of stress in a healthy way. It forces you to get out of this box of not wanting to question everything that you do.
Right.
And so to me, a practical example for PolicyLink means leaders must know the evolutionary period that they're entering. The fight for being able to talk about race and equity have already been won for us. How tragic would it be if I didn't get that point and I'm going back and trying to re-prosecute things that were already won 20 years ago? That's not the moment that I'm taking up my leadership in. So the way I honor folks like Angela and so many others in the field who have brought us this moment is to be clear about what is my work. My work is to have a democracy and an economy that is not oppressive. That's all that's left for me to do. Now, if I don't want to do that work, I have options. I don't have to be the CEO of PolicyLink. I don't have to be in this role. But nonetheless, that is the work. And I must get my organization oriented to that work. And it just doesn't start looking externally. I have to ask the question, where will we hire our Indigenous brothers and sisters? How will I make sure that my pay doesn't really outpace the pay of the lowest person in the organization? Where will women be paid on par with us in our organization? Where will they have leadership roles in the organization? Those are all things that I'm authorized to do right now. So the work of equity is not just about running around and talking about it. It's about trying to struggle through the messiness of doing it in my own firm. And I don't have it all right either at PolicyLink. So that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I need to have the humility and the courage to want to struggle through getting it right. And that I've got to own what I'm already authorized to do.
So I'm going to go back. There's a lot there. So I want to go back to something you said. So there is actually not a complicated matter here for institutions to fully take up the work. And you said two very key dynamics. One is, are we focused on the folks on the margins who are suffering? Mm-hmm. And are we able every day to ask, how are we actually seeing these folks better off by virtue of the work we do? Nothing more complicated than that. And so this gets at kind of a much more sophisticated notion of proximity that you hear Brian Stevens talk about. If you're locating your analysis with those folks and you're every day either saying we're moving the needle or not, if we're not, we're changing our behavior so that we can actually make that work. Or we let somebody else who's more qualified or more capable to step into those decision-making. It's as simple as that. I don't want to be too reductionistic, but it seems like, and just by the way, not to hold you out too far, but as we talk to the Nobel Peace Prize women, which we're talking to this afternoon, it is the same point. It isn't complicated when you are actually at the core of the injustice and you hold that injustice at the place where you actually want to see it change. We can make it really complicated through analysis, which is important. And that's the second point you made, is don't be ahistorical in your analysis. Know the leaders that came on before you and have the humility to actually implement their ideas.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So, first of all, before we go on, we have chat and Q&A function. I want to make sure that those who are on the line engage with us. This is important work. Michael and I have been friends. We've had this conversation. We thought it was important to have it publicly, but we care most about how you all are metabolizing this. Good, bad, what do you think? What holds us back? What should we be doing? So just keep that there. I want to dive into something that you and I have talked about, dangerous leadership.
Yeah.
So at a time when, you know, a dangerous leader with the kind of social unrest we have could be somebody who's a white nationalist or Antifa. You got the whole range of stuff. That is a loaded term. So let's talk about dangerous institutional leadership.
Yeah. Dangerous leadership to me means that you can manifest love. That you can see the humanity of folks that don't look like you and can summon the courage to work on their behalf to alleviate that pain and suffering. That's what's dangerous. It means that whether I'm in the White House or in community or in a state capitol or in a wealthy donor's home, that I can bring that pain and suffering into that space and advocate on behalf of it. That's what it means to be dangerous. Dangerous means I want to create a world that actually works for more than just some of us who have privilege, that it works for everyone. That's what's dangerous. 20 years ago, folks said it was dangerous to say Black people. It was dangerous to say equity. Dangerous to me is simply the manifestation of love that's going to bring about a society that is commensurate with that notion. That's what's dangerous. And for those of us who have taken up these roles of leadership, to accept the fact that there is going to be some loss, there is going to be some suffering in taking up your leadership role. And if you're not prepared to deal with it, no one's asking you to be a martyr. But the reality is these are perilous roles to have. And the only thing I know to do is to honor the role by doing the work. And what's going to happen with how long I can stay in this role or whatever, it's going to happen. But the thing that I know I'll be able to sleep easy about at night is that I didn't shortchange the gift that I've been given by my ancestors, to be able to be in the seat, to be able to do the work with such amazing folks at PolicyLink, that we did that work with the right conviction and the right spirit, and the right connectedness to community. I mean, that's all you got at the end of the day. And so all I'm trying to figure out right now is how to love in a way that is just not on the individual level, that institutionally it translates into the set of the legal and regulatory framework of this nation, and how you show me that you'll do the thing that you've never done, which is to love its people. It's our indigenous brothers and sisters and Black folks, and ultimately poor people in this nation. That is our work. And being dangerous means you do not say their names simply because someone says, you know what, we talked about equity last year. When you come do your keynote this year, can we talk about something else? Hey, because that's how it shows up. People, hey, our board isn't really comfortable with this topic. Can you think about other ways to say it? You don't do that anymore. Those days are gone now. And it doesn't mean that we can't be respectful of people where they're at and their journeys. But what I get frustrated by in our sector is the very thing that I'm saying we fetishize in business. We like dangerous leaders in business. We like leaders who will break the rules. We like leaders who do liberating work, create new markets, new sectors, new industries, new ways of being in society. Over here, we run them out of town. We run them out of town. And we hire milquetoast leaders who are scared as hell to say anybody's name. And then we still want to banty around these fancy words. And to me, that's where it's just time for that to end. You have plenty of exemplars of it. Hell, we act like we have low self-esteem. We look to business for everything when we've got amazing leaders in our community. Think about it. People of color have brought you a movement that is global in nature, the biggest that we've ever had. Think about that. And yet, folks are still deciding if they want to be down with it. It's such disrespect. It's such disrespect when you don't even have anything better to offer. And that's what it's time to stop. And if I don't do anything with my role, it is to say that. Stop the disrespect. You asked us to use our brains. You asked us to mobilize. You ask us to put our bodies on the line. We do all of that. And then you still ask us to make the damn case for whether you're going to act or not. Please. It's no longer my work if you don't get this right now. You've got to really do your own deep soul searching to say, will you join? We all have to do our own soul searching. I have to do the same. And what you're hearing me call people to is, let's just honor what's been brought to us. Because if we don't, you can see that this nation is going to go in a very different way. And what I often say to people, and then I'll shut up, is this. Folks lament this moment that we're in with this administration, but what I say is, you know what? This administration fights for its people. This administration fights structurally. This administration tells you what they mean, tell you what they think about you, and they'll do it. And we have the same ability to participate in this democracy. The question is, will we? And so while we can keep looking and wringing our hands and being concerned about what others are doing by taking up their right to participate in this democracy, I'm saying, you know what? We could do the same.
Two things. So love in action is courageous. When it goes from individual, isn't that painful, to structural. And the courage to sustain love around structure is the work.
Yeah.
It's what we're being called to do. So I want to go in two different directions at the same time. You know my background, and I always ask this question around what do you draw on values wise, spirituality wise, to sustain love at scale when there is constant struggle? It's a fight where anger and indignation have a rightful place to drive the work forward. So what is that internal work you, Michael, do to hold love at the center without saying, like, anger and indignation are actually extraordinarily appropriate human loving responses in the face of this injustice?
Well, in some ways it's easier for me because I wasn't born and enculturated to hate. I just wasn't. That's not my orientation. So I'm not trying to exclude white people. It was nothing that was ever ingrained in me. So I start from right there, that people of color weren't bred to hate, to design a world that excludes them. So I don't even have the burden of that. That's not what's on my mind. So I'm already starting with seeing everybody's humanity. That's a blessing. So I start right there, that I'm starting by already seeing my poor white brothers and sisters. I'm starting by already seeing how many of them are being caught up in unemployment systems right now that were designed to not work for Black folks. And now they're sweeping up all these white folks right now who still around the country haven't even gotten their first unemployment check. See, that's what happens when you build a mousetrap to oppress. Sooner or later, you can't contain it. So I don't start with that orientation of having to be retooled, reconstructed around being able to see white people's humanity. That helps, or anyone's humanity for that matter. But then the question becomes, what do I want to do with the privilege that I've ultimately gotten? And, that comes from my family. That comes from the Jesuit upbringing that I got and the Lassallean education that I got. And it comes from now my own desire to realize that, having had a confrontation with my own mortality in 2012 with getting blood clots in my lungs from traveling around the country so much, that there's nothing else left for me to do. And the realization that I had then was that sitting in that hospital bed with doctors pointing fingers at me like they've never seen a person that wasn't either passed out or dead by having one blood clot break into multiple ones in both lungs in George Washington Hospital in DC, it was actually one of the most liberating things for me, because I was sitting there not like, oh God, please give me another day. I'll do right. I was quite contented that I'm doing the work I'm supposed to be doing. Now, I wasn't ready to check out. But, oftentimes we don't get those moments to see if the crap that you're talking is really lining up right. And I've had two of those privileges. Early in my career, getting fired in Kansas City for doing this work and having to be confronted with, if I'm quiet, I can have an amazing career, but the trade-off is you got to be quiet. I chose not to be quiet. The sanction was I got fired, had to move on. And then coming to PolicyLink and getting another confrontation with that, which is now, take stock of your life sitting in this hospital bed. Where you at? And while my wife was like, Michael, will you shut up about how happy you are and how good things are? It was the best thing, because it has cemented for me what I had learned in my 20s, which is, who do I serve? I had been serving them. And now the only thing left for me to do, the only thing I'm chasing is results at scale for real, designing a nation that works for everyone. So the way I stay charged up right now is, quite frankly, to know that I get to go to an organization with such amazing people every day who are focused on this work. I mean, if you ever, I mean, there's nothing better than having colleagues in the struggle with you. Colleagues who will be a loving critic, colleagues that'll push you, colleagues that you can model their exemplary leadership. That's the first thing. But the second, to know that in my soul, there's nothing else left for me to do, but to be in relationship with folks to try to do this work. That's all that's left for me. And that is a liberating place, because I can be at peace about whether, you know, the board decides that they've had enough of me and want to move on. That's fine. I'm still going to do this work somewhere. And when you can let go of whether you're going to have that position or that title or whatever, you can move through the world a little easier. And so that's how I stay charged up. But the last thing I'll say is the reason why I stay charged up is because I'm still angry, and I don't ever want to not be angry. I'm angry to see the comfort of an institution with its knee on a man's neck. I'm angry to see women in these detention centers being treated the way we just saw come out in the paper around this high proportion of hysterectomies, et cetera. I'm angry about that stuff, and I should be angry about it. But there's a way to channel that anger so that I'm not attacking folks personally. To start, it may come to a point where we need to do that, but that I could try to join first. I mean, but the reality is this work will require a fight. Liberation is going to require a fight, and it's going to require us to have some serious conflict in this nation. And we should not be fooled to think that it won't. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I want to use the anger to stay motivated. But when the time comes, which is right now, to fight, what you hear me saying is, I'm trying to structure PolicyLink to continue this fight and to understand that that is its job. It is to fight in this moment, in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the street. And so now the question is, how do we do it smartly? How do we do it in a way that is not self-destructive, but nonetheless effective?
So let's, thank you. We've got about a little over 10 minutes. And again, I want to encourage if people, if you have burning questions, there's a huge amount of activity in the chat. So a lot to reflect on. Something that you and I have talked about that I feel obliged to bring into light, because I think it's one of the questions of our day. Those of us in civil society, white leaders like myself who have spent their career trying to do right by the world, not dissimilar to the way you describe it. And yet also blind, complicit, and building or perpetuating systems that actually oppress. And so there's this tension. You hear on one hand institutions that are large and noisy and complicated saying, look, we got to do this piece by piece. It's an incremental process. And if you locate the way you just described your point of analysis in solidarity from a racial structural racist point of view and from the margins of poverty, those are related, but they can be distinct, you feel a different kind of urgency, and incrementalism is put in tension. And these large legacy organizations, when someone like myself can toggle in and toggle out. So let's have a conversation about the urgency versus the complexity of organizational change. And what do white leaders step back and create space for folks of color and who've been on the margins, or other white folks who've been on the margin to step into those roles? Let's name the struggle here and what people are trying to figure out.
First, I would say it's all of our jobs to create space. So I'm never going to tell white folks to step back or step forward. All of us should be creating space. So I don't get exempted from that responsibility. So I start there on that. The question there is, am I creating space in my own organization? But the reality is this, we transform overnight when we have to. We just did it with COVID. We can transform. We all went to a virtual environment when we've been saying for years, I got to see your face. We can't do this. This is be bad policy to have everybody working from home. The organization will fall apart. We just did it. We do it dysfunctionally though. Imagine if we were to do it proactively. I mean, the reality is this. What should be incremental about hiring a diverse staff right now? What should be incremental about that? What should be incremental about having a diverse board of directors? What should be incremental about doing results-based work? I mean, those are all things that we're saying. I mean, I can guarantee if I came in most of our organizations and pulled out their planning documents, they're using words like structural racism, anti-racist, then do that shit. Otherwise, strip the words out. That's my point. Stop using transformative words and then telling me you don't want to do the work. And here's the problem. You never get to the transformative work. That's what becomes so frustrating. You never get to it. We've been waiting for 400 damn years. We never get to it. You see my point? And so at what point do we want to be able to have the metrics to say, we tried that, now let's do something else? And that's what you hear people of color saying right now. We've been suffering. We've been doing that. We've been patient. We've tried not to riot. You don't hear it. You just keep telling us how we should accept oppression. You just keep telling us how to accept it. And yet, when we look at some of the most basic metrics, it takes you 20 years to find one woman to be on your board.
Right.
Or one Black person. Really? I mean, let's get real about the nature of our institutions. They're better than that, and the leaders are better than that, and the boards are better than that. And I think if we start just situating what do we really want to own about the truth, about what we have the commitment to do, the world would be better off, because you don't have to do this work. That's why I say that. If you don't want to do this right now, stop sucking up the money. Because the reality is there are folks on the ground who are doing this work. And so this is what I'm saying to you. And this goes for PolicyLink too. If I'm afraid to do the work, I don't have to suck up the money. There are folks who know how to do it and are doing it. This is what transformative solidarity is about. If you're scared, join with the courageous folks. So plenty of them out there in every city. For God's sake, you got folks in North Carolina talking about reparations in Asheville, North Carolina. So think about that for a moment. In some places that we snub and turn our nose up, you see them doing more liberating work than big cities where you've been getting billions and billions of dollars for years. And you can't even talk about reparations yet. Little towns like Asheville, North Carolina, talking about it. This is what I mean. It just doesn't add up anymore. So I'm all for, I get the arc of the universe is long. I just don't believe that it bends towards justice just because you say it. I think it bends towards justice because you start doing the damn work. And you've got enough agency already to just start trying to do it within your own shop. Because if you struggle with that, you will know how to accelerate. The reason why I can talk this way is because I try to do the work internally and I take the butt kicking that goes along with that too. It's hard. It's hard to manage a diverse staff. It is hard to bring all this energy in the house and hold it together. But it's the most exciting and fun stuff to do. And when it works, it really works.
It really works.
Yeah.
We got a bunch of questions, so I'm going to fire these out and see what happens. So what comes next? What are the next steps? That's number one. What would it feel like if instead of the metaphor of fighting, we use the metaphor of transformation, not as a way of opting out of speaking and acting the truth, but in a way of thinking differently about the opponents? That was 2. Number 3 is, how do we do this work in love is key? Statement. Question, how do we scale the institutionalized love, compassion, and empathy?
Well, I'm going to say this. People can use whatever word they want to use, but when you're hurting my family and you're hurting my brothers and sisters, I'm going to fight. I don't think if someone was breaking your house, hurting your kids, you're going to use the word transformation. You're going to defend them. And so this is where I get really frustrated with our sector. We keep trying to find a word that's that comfort I'm talking about. People are dying. You saw it in the street. That is a fight. That is state-sanctioned murder against Black folks. That is a fight. And the sooner we can just own, fighting is not what I want to do, but it may be what I have to do, the better. Now, if you got a better way, show it to me. Let's stop philosophizing about it. We live in a world where we can actually put this stuff into action and see what happens. But what I keep finding is, for all the folks who want to frame and tell me to narrate and to message, I don't see the police departments giving a damn about that. I don't see them choosing to behave differently when they are confronted with someone who looks like me. So my thing is, when you can get your white institutions to stop treating me this way, then I'll listen to you telling me how to frame and narrate. But right now, that ain't working. And you gotta own that. See, everybody keeps wanting to turn that guidance towards me. I'm not the one that's oppressing. Turn it to your institutions and get them to stop. Then you'll tell me about it. This is where white America can help us. What's next? I think what's next is our institutions to put an expectation down around a couple of things. The first is around the type of democracy we're going to have. Imagine if independent sector, the rest of civil society leaders coupled with business leaders said, you know what, elected officials, in the next 5 years, America is going to be the easiest place to vote unencumbered.
Amen.
Right? If you talk about empowerment and people power and power building, all those words we use, then our first standard should be, we're going to start holding everybody accountable, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, for over the next 5 years, making this country the easiest place to manifest the most elegant expression of participating in democracy. That's one, right? Just if we did that.
Just so we stop there, because you know this is one of our single biggest issues, that a civic participant, one of our results as an organization, that voting is fully enfranchised, period, end of statement. Keep going.
And that should be an organizing way for all of us to come around. I mean, it's just fundamental to the construction of this country. And so I would say start there. The second is to ask corporations and institutions just to stop doing harm. Stop doing harm. Before we can get you to do developmental stuff, can we just stop you from doing the harm? And imagine if all of our institutional leaders said, where am I hurting people? Where am I hurting them? Internally or externally? And how do I begin to stop that? How do I begin to stop it? It would be transformative. And I'll give you a really good example. You know, even in my own shop, you know, we've got policies and procedures and they don't work for everyone. And recently I've had to make some tough decisions that cause staff to push back on me to say, oh, hell no. I don't like that. And it started a conversation where we're thinking about how do we have more restorative personnel practices? That's that renewal, that regenerative force inside the organization that was saying, that ain't working for us anymore. And we expect more from you. It was a hard moment. But now we're in relationship and figuring it out. That is just what the work looks like, right? I mean, this is the work of running an organization and struggling, and it plays out on broader levels. And so for me, what did you hear me saying is the first, if you want to start somewhere, let's see if we can align around protecting this democracy and liberating everyone's voice in it through the vote. That would be one way. As it relates to corporations, imagine if we started talking about worker power and what would it look like? We could start there. Imagine what it would look like to talk about wages and start there. Imagine what it would look like to talk about a federal jobs guarantee, since we know we've got so much unemployment, and start there. There are a wide variety of areas where we can start, where we do have a historical basis for thinking that way. There is evidence around and support for thinking that way. And the question is, do we want to do that? And so I can't tell people where to start because everybody's got to find that in their own heart. What you hear me saying is, I've got a lot of work to do inside my own shop to model equity. So I'm starting there. Policies and procedures. Where do we recruit? Do we just recruit at the best schools? Or do we recruit folks that are returning citizens? Do we recruit folks who went to state schools? There's a whole, see, there's miles and miles of opportunity for me to be expansive inside my own shop. And then when it comes to the work externally, we're choosing to play in, will we change the legal and regulatory framework of the nation? And so that's why I'm raising the work around the democracy and the economy.
Yeah, yeah. So 45 minutes just flew by, as it always does when we get talking. So let's go to the balcony for a second and just appreciate, one, the friendship and the ability to have this conversation, to your leadership, and not just your leadership, but your intentional leadership. You've made something that Sarah Kostelik, another board member of ours who's Native Alaskan, often say, that if we're, in a sense, child-focused, community engaged and elder informed, we actually come up with a strategy that can hold humanity at the center and the health of community and confront the hard work that we have to do. So the takeaways I'd love for just to throw out for folks are, first of all, kind of radical solidarity, while remaining maniacally focused on moving the needle on actual results, less talk, more action, and hyper measurement. Love that has both individual, organizational, and collective scale, and a willingness to harness the power of the indignation of injustice into the most constructive, but not candy-coated naming of the problem and acting on it. And that whether white, Black-led, Native-led, person of color-led institution, it is about the work and the solidarity that's required.
Yeah, I mean, that's all we have left right now is to get in relationship with each other, to do this work and be on this journey, and to be humble while doing so. I mean, and while I may sound absolute, I'm struggling through the messiness of trying to do this work just like everybody else. And the thing that, like I said, the thing that has got me, as we close, so hopeful is I'm seeing all walks of life transform institutions that we never thought would change quickly. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing us stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the street. And the only thing that I ask is if you don't know what to do next, just pull up the Movement for Black Lives platform. It's quite expansive. Find one area that you're comfortable with and make a big contribution right there. The agenda has been set. The people have spoken. The young people have inherited this revolution and they're doing an amazing job. And our job has to be now to align in transformative solidarity with it and figure out how do we use our privilege and all the resources that we have to make the most substantial contribution as possible.